All right, so when we think about herbs, when we understand them, we look at them often through the lens of energetics. Is this herb heating or cooling? Is it moistening or drying? Is it tonifying or relaxant? These fundamental spectra help us to understand our herb, to orient it in relation to others, put it into an effective formula, match it to the right person.
And I think also to see it in its full context. When we say bitters will help digestion, there's an extremely small view of what is really going on. But when we look at the energetic actions and we say, oh, okay, this is stimulating of like fluids in the body. This is like has a most commonly drying aspect or whatever else. Then we can break out and say like, oh, I need a plant that can be drying and draining, and I don't have a lot of options right now. If you are thinking that a certain bitter plant, let's go with, I don't know, let's do something super, super just bitter and go with Centauri. And you're thinking, oh, that's for the stomach. Okay, yes, it is. But if you think about it energetically and you recognize, okay, well, it's cooling, it's drying and draining and a little astringent, a little tonifying, then if you are someplace and you're like, I don't have a lot of herbs available, but I do have my Centauri with me because I take that as my bitter before a meal, and this other person is having this other problem of too much moisture and too much laxity in the body. Well, Centauri is not just for digestion.
Right.
It has these actions, and those actions are going to work in many aspects of the body. And so what we're saying here is that when you think about things energetically, you are not pigeonholing your herbs into one particular place that they're effective, but you're able to see the full context of their skill, of their talent, of their abilities, of their actions, so that you can plug that in many more places than you thought you could.
Yeah. And energetics, it comes in tendencies rather than definitives, right? So there's two ways to talk about bitters here. One would be to say that bitters are almost always drying, usually cooling, and there's a lot more variability in terms of tonifying and relaxant. We could also say that what in an herb is bitter is going to be drying and cooling, and then maybe more often relaxant. But in that same herb, there's a bunch of other stuff that can alter or overwhelm or adjust those energetics that the bitter elements are contributing, right?
Yeah, that was why also choosing Centauri as the option, because Centauri is fairly purely bitter.
Right.
Doesn't mean that there's nothing else going on.
Yeah.
But so you can depend on it to like fit those real classic actions.
Yeah.
Whereas if we thought of something like calamus or elecampane, where they've got a lot of other stuff going on in the plant, like heating components and spiciness and like all these different flavors, just because they're a very complex plant with lots of different...
But they have complex flavors is the thing, right?
Yeah, phytochemistry, right.
Yeah. So with a calamus or an angelica, you taste bitter, you also taste pungency. Right. And pungency says heat, pungency says fire, right? So you can say, all right, so there is the bitter element. This herb, if we were to somehow remove all the fire from calamus, it would be a cooling bitter plant, right? but that pungency is there, that fire is there, and so it overwhelms that innate cooling quality of the bitter unto itself. Yeah.
It's like, because so frequently, almost always, plants themselves are formulas.
Right.
Plants are complex. You are a formula also. You are not just a person who likes herbs. You like also other things. And that makes you, like, maybe you have some friends who only know that you're the plant person. That's fine. But there's a lot of complexity to you as a person. That's true in the plants as well. At that chemistry level, there's just a lot of complexity going on. And so we can think about each plant as its own formula, actually.
Yeah. So if I tasted something, I don't know what plant it is, and it just tastes straight up bitter, I'm going to expect it 99 times out of 100, I'm going to expect it to be a drying influence on my system. And think of it this way. When you secrete fluids, they go somewhere. Right? Even if you secrete them into the tubes inside of your body, many of them are still going to exit your body. Right? Some stuff gets reabsorbed, yeah, okay. But a lot of it exits, right? So you squeeze the juice out of the meat of you into the tube of you, and then it's going to leave you. And so yeah, ultimately that has a drying impact. A lot of bitter herbs are also going to have some diuretic action, right? Because again, it's not only your stomach and your liver. There can be kidney activation here as well, and so there can be that route to dryness at the same time.
Please always do that. Always be thinking about, oh, I am secreting fluids out of the meat of me, into the tube of me, and out of me. And that's why it is drying. Don't just memorize Centauri's drying, because then you've no way to explain that to somebody. You don't understand the mechanism of action. You're just trusting somebody else who told you that it was drying.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't trust anybody. Don't trust us. Work through that in your own mind and in your own body. And thinking through, like, how is it drying? How is that happening? So that, okay, I mean, you don't so much have to say, how is cayenne heating? Like, it's really spicy. It's heating because it's really spicy. All right, sometimes it's super obvious. But sometimes when it's like, oh, it's draining, what does that mean? And it's not that it's not obvious. I mean, it wasn't super complicated. It's draining. Yeah, you're squirting out fluids so that you can use them in the digestive process, and then you're going to remove them from your body, and you're going to need to make more of those fluids. Yeah, so you end up literally draining the fluid out of you. But going through that process of, like, saying that to yourself so that you really understand why it's working, why it's happening, that also is going to give you such a broader spectrum of ability to apply any given herb to many different situations, which is just always good because you don't always have everything at your fingertips.
Yeah. So we taste something bitter. We expect it to be drying. There are exceptions. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
If it has bitter without a bunch of other flavors on top, it's usually going to be cooling in nature, right? Generally, if it's bitter but it doesn't have a pungent flavor to it or a spicy flavor to it at all, then you'd say, all right, this is going to be neck cooling. We expect that. That's the more common one. And then for tonifying and relaxant, with this, you could either say that it's highly variable and think on the one hand of golden seal, like wicked tonifying herb, right? Or motherwort, right? Almost as bitter. I mean, in terms of just straight up bitterness, they're fairly close, right? But motherwort is extremely relaxant as an herb, right? So we could say there's like strong variability between all of our bitter plants. We could also say maybe that it's about which tissues or systems they're most active on, right? Like motherwort is an amazing bitter, but it doesn't have a lot of activity on mucous membranes. It has a lot of activity on nervous system, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas golden seal is like, give me those mucosa, I'm going to squeeze them tight. But not a ton of nervous system activity there, right? So you could say, in general, bitters, we could expect them to like tonify our digestive mucosa and relax our nerves, right, because of that parasympathetic activation. Mm-hmm. And certainly in terms of your own emotional experience, like as a layperson, do you say, I feel tense or I feel relaxed right now? Because of that parasympathetic effect, it's more often that kind of subjective relaxation that you experience, right? So tonifying relaxant's a little complicated. Think about tissues, think about like the variation between different bitter plants, and just let that be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, energetics are important in and of themselves. They help us match herbs to people. But between your energetics and the tissue affinities that a plant has, that's where our actions come from, right? When an herb, like a bitter comes into your body, it stimulates, as we've said over and over, digestion, right? You can say that they're appetite stimulants, that they're digestive tonics, that they're cholagogues, they make the bile flow, right? And so those are all about like waking up digestion, getting it moving, improving the efficiency, and so on. And those are the most famous effects of bitters. Sometimes they're the most obvious effects of them. There's a little nuance here too, though, right? When we talk about the appetite, with bitters, I find them super, super helpful for people who wake up in the morning and they're not hungry for breakfast, right? Maybe because they ate late or like close to bedtime last night, or it's just been their habit for years and years. But if you wake up in the morning, you take some bitters, you can generate some hunger for breakfast, and that can be really helpful. Another thing, though, and if you dig into some bitter science, you'll find this as well, is that bitters can reduce overeating behavior. And so for some people, you hear those two things next to each other and you're like, that's kind of contradictory. Yeah. What's going on here, right? And I think in one sense, it's not actually contradictory at all. They're about waking up the stomach and helping the rest of you to be connected to your stomach and what's happening in it.
Right, like if you're not getting the message that you're full, if you're not getting the message that you're satisfied, then you'll keep eating. And it's important to recognize also that food science and food engineering, like that is an entire industry specifically created to override those signals so that you will eat more, so that you will then purchase more. So that is important to recognize. But what if you were eating something that wasn't engineered? What if you were just eating like cherries or something like that? Getting that signal from your body into your brain that says, I had enough, I don't need any more. Well, all of that is about having that connection between your brain and your body, which is why when you are eating at the computer, you're working and you're snacking, it is a lot harder to know when you should stop snacking because you don't need any more food, because your brain is inside the computer. It's not inside your body anymore. It's in the computer doing the work on the computer, and your body is just like sort of sitting there by itself, like, I guess I'm snacking.
Where is the attention in your body? Which signals are getting through to the brain, to your consciousness, right? To where you really experience them. And so in this way, bitters are kind of an awareness medicine. Awareness for what's going on inside of yourself. That's pretty deep, huh? Through this suite of digestive effects and stuff we mentioned before, right? Like helping to break down your food into more readily digested or readily absorbed components, and through some of those effects on the gut flora, right? There can be a predictable impact on your blood sugar levels when you start to work with bitters to help bring them into a more normal range, right? To reduce spikes, to reduce troughs as well, but especially to reduce the high spikes of blood sugar level. And just as a side comment, in recent years, berberine in particular has become very popular as a supplement or a nutraceutical or an isolate to take to improve blood sugar regulation. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, because yes, it does. But sometimes it can.
But I'm saying it's not a good idea.
But yeah, this odd thing happens though, where people hear that about berberine, and then they learn that berberine comes from plants, and then they say, "Great, I can go and I can grab a plant tincture, and I can take it, and it will give me the berberine, and that will normalize my blood sugar." And the nuance here is that we do expect them to get some improvement in their blood sugar level, but not solely because of the berberine in that plant, especially because in a lot of cases, the dose they're taking of their herb extract is providing a tiny amount of berberine in comparison to the capsules of isolated berberine that are clinically proven to reduce blood sugar by this many points and so on.
Yeah. But the thing is that it's also really tonifying, really tightening, really drying, and so it's not without a cost. You can get to where you're taking that, and it is helping blood sugar levels, but it's also like giving you gut cramping and making it harder even to absorb nutrients because everything is astringing so much in the guts.
So what I would say here is, if people are excited when they hear about the benefits of plant medicines to improve their blood sugar, I wouldn't say what you have to do is find the herb with the most berberine in it and get that, right? I would say find the bitter that matches your body, your needs, your set of systems and symptoms as well as it can, because that's going to be the best one for you over the long run. And blood sugar regulation is not a short-term job.
Right.
This is a long-term.
It's an everyday job.
Right. Okay. So other actions of bitters that we can always expect, right? Any bitter we expect all these actions we're describing here. So it's like you mentioned before, draining, right? And that can be very helpful when there's fluid bloating, right? Maybe there's fluid bloating around the belly. Well, let's get some bitters into you, right? Let's try to drain that excess fluid, like stir it up, move it around, get it to your kidney, drain it out of the system, reduce that fluid retention. Really, really handy.
Plus, a lot is when we're thinking specifically about belly bloating, a lot of that fluid is coming from problems in digestion. Either because you're eating something that your body is sensitive or intolerant of, and so you're actually having an immune response, and that fluid that is bloating is literally immune system response. You have lymphatic glands all around your digestive tract. Exactly the same as the ones in your neck. When you were a little kid and you wanted to stay home sick from school because you didn't feel good or because you were trying to avoid a test, and then your parent would touch your throat to see if your glands were swollen, and if they were swollen, then you were allowed to stay home because that means you're sick, because if those glands are swollen, that is an indication of immune activity, right? Does that make you feel differently about the bloating in your belly? It's the exact same in many, many cases. Sometimes it's just gas or that kind of thing. But when it is a bunch of fluid in response to what you ate, it's the same as your glands in your throat getting swollen. So that is your body saying something here is triggering an immune response. Something here is not working right. And when we introduce bitters into that situation, we're repairing so much of the digestive process. Now, it would also be great to extroduce foods that are causing this intolerant sort of situation or sensitivity situation.
Yep.
And if, because we mentioned mast cell activation syndrome, and that is kind of very tied up here, you could just lay that on top of everything that just got said. There's so many parallels here, because that immune response, there is an inflammatory aspect of that. And mast cells, while they are not the entire inflammation cascade, they are part of the inflammation cascade. So recognizing that by removing the food, that part is important, removing the foods that are causing that extra inflammatory response. But the other part of that is bringing in the bitters to repair the digestive function. It's all this stuff is super important, and when we say, oh, it'll just make the bloating go away, we just think, oh, then my genes won't feel bad after a meal or whatever, and we don't really think through that what's going on there is an immune response that really does need to be addressed.
Yeah.
So I don't ever want to miss the opportunity to.
Yeah. So between that, those direct influences on the way the immune process unfolds, between those effects on normalizing the blood sugar levels, improving digestion, reducing inflammation in the GI tract itself, which can be the spark, and then the fire spreads throughout the rest of your body. Through all of these effects, bitters have anti-inflammatory actions to them, right? And of course, that's really relevant in a time in the world when most of the chronic diseases people are coping with are inflammatory in nature.
Yeah.
Another thing about bitters is that they can have antimicrobial effects, and some of them are more famous for this than others, right? Like wormwood and other plants that contain artemisinin, and then any of the plants that contain berberine, right? Like golden seal and Oregon grapefruit. Famously, herbal antimicrobials, yes? But almost every bitter constituent is serving an antimicrobial role in the plant it grows in or is produced by, right? So remember, plants make these chemicals for their own purposes.
Yeah, they're not doing this because they're altruistically trying to help humans out. Plants are living creatures, living beings all on their own, and they are creating all these chemicals phytochemicals to enable their own lives.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they don't have tongues, they don't have stomachs, they don't have livers. But they do sometimes get attacked by microbes, and these constituents can help combat them. So if you find yourself with your little herb travel kit somewhere, and you realize you didn't pack anything for an infected wound, get the bitterest remedy you've got and put it on there, and you can expect some improvements for sure.
Yeah.
So again, if it's a bitter herb, you can expect all of those actions we just discussed. Any bitter plant is going to have other actions as well on top of those. And that's where we get into differentiating them and what makes them unique and why we choose this one over that one for this purpose, for this problem,
For this person. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Just briefly, because we've mentioned constituents, and phytochemistry once or twice. Your bitter taste receptors do not respond to one chemical that is the bitter compound of the world. Right?
Capital bitter TM.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of chemistry that are gonna trigger that bitter response, that flavor, that taste, but also all of these reactions within your body we've been discussing. So that can include terpenoids. And we go like category terpenoids, and then the monoterpenoids. And a group in there in particular is like super, super bitter. They're called secoiridoid compounds. And a couple examples come out of gentian and related plants, including centauri. One of the most bitter compounds that's been found on Earth so far is called gentiopicroside. And that comes, you can hear gentia in it, right? Like it comes out of that group. There's also amarogentin, which is basically, like if you break the word down, amaro is bitter, and gentin is like from the gentians. So, sometimes chemistry names look intimidating, but actually they're really simple. It's the bitter stuff from the gentian plants.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's one group.
But like even that's just two examples, both found in the gentian plant. Mm-hmm. And other plants as well. Just because it has the name gentian there
right.
doesn't mean that other plants don't also have it. What that means is the first time that we discovered it in such a way that it required a name, we were looking at gentian at the time.
Yeah, you can play a game when you read constituent names and be like, do I recognize the plant that comes from, right? Mm-hmm. So in a related group here called sesquiterpene lactones, these are like small terpenoid compounds with a particular ring structure on them, we find artemisinin and taraxacin. And if you're thinking, hey, is that from Artemisia, mugwort, wormwood? Is that from taraxacum, dandelion? Then give yourself some points. You did it.
Yeah.
Good job.
But artemisinin is not, like, you should not expect that it can only ever be found in the Artemisia family.
Right.
One of my favorite examples for this is thymol. Mm-hmm. Thymol, Thymol. You're like, well, that's in thyme. Yeah, and it's in like basically every mint plant.
Oh yeah.
Are all the smelly mint plants. And then you're like, well, or like linalol. Yeah.
Linalol.
Yeah, with two O's right next to each other.
Some people say linalool, but whatever. You can say what you want. It doesn't matter, right? So, but that one is most famously found in lavender. Mm-hmm. But it turns out in a bunch of other floral bits as well.
Right. Yeah. And so we get in these places where we think like, oh, that is called thymol because it's in thyme. And then we're like shocked when it's in oregano. No, like they smell really similar, but then we're like shocked when it's in a plant that we didn't necessarily think about thyme when we, but that's the thing. We just name these chemicals based on the plant that we found them in first.
Right.
And just always remembering that they can show up in other plants too.
Yeah.
Just like you maybe use a wooden spoon in your kitchen. That doesn't mean that other people don't use wooden spoons too. If it's a helpful tool, it's a helpful tool.
Yeah, right.
And lots of people may have figured out that a wooden spoon is really great because it doesn't scratch the bottom of the pan and it this and that and whatever. It doesn't get hot. So there are like lots of great reasons to use one. Plants do the same thing with these chemicals. They're like, oh, hey, if I make this, that's going to make my life easier. Yeah. But lots of plants may have figured that out.
Yeah. On the other hand, not every plant can make every chemical, and there are a few things that seem to be very particular, like maybe just a genus, if not only one species. A diterpenoid example of bitter compounds include coffeol and cafestol, which both come from coffee, right? Remember we've been talking about black coffee. And even some triterpenoids can be bitter, like there's one called actaein, which is found in Actaea racemosa, or black cohosh. And there, I just mentioned that because now we've gone from monoterpenoids to sesqui to di to tri. So we're getting like progressively larger molecules here. And the thing about bitter as a flavor is it's not bound to only super tiny molecules or only super big ones. Contrast that with something like the mucilaginous sensation or flavor. That's only going to come from big molecules, polysaccharides, right? These things that, if you draw a chemical diagram, they take up half the page, if you really draw the whole thing, right? So bitter is something that we can detect from a really broad range of like sizes and shapes of molecules. It's something that our bodies clearly wanted to pay extra attention to because we developed this flexibility in what we notice.
If you're wondering what the size is going on there, a monoterpenoid, that's 1. Sesqui is 1.5. Terpenoids are 2, and triterpenes are 3.
Yeah.
So that is referring to when you look at the molecule itself, they're getting progressively larger because there's more things stacked around.
Like more units are added on.
Right. So that's what we're talking about in terms of that molecule size. And the reason that that's so important is that it means that the receptors we have for bitter either are very flexible and they can recept many different sizes, many different types of molecules, or, and in fact it's going to be we have many types of receptors because we realized that all of these different molecules were really helpful and we needed to be able to grab onto each different kind. So we need to be able to make a receptor that will specifically grab each one of those.
And then to trigger similar responses, right? So if it's one receptor that's multi-powered, or if it's multiple receptors that all feed into the same signal that comes in and says, bitter up here, and says, wake up down here, right? Then thanks, evolution. Pretty good job on that one.
Yeah.
A couple other constituent categories that can taste bitter. Some of the flavonoids, right? Quercetin is one that's actually fairly common in like green leafy veggies, and this is where some people will taste things like kale and detect a bitter note to it. And those tend to be like super tasters for bitter. The person reacts much more strongly to bitter flavors than the average human does. That's one of those kind of variants in human taste, like the cilantro thing, like a bunch of stuff. But some people, look, if you have a friend and you give them a tincture of a moderate bitter, like yarrow, and you're like, this is not super intense. This isn't like, gentian root. This is like, okay. And they take it and they're like, wah! Then they may just be a bitter super taster. And they may be just fine with some mild bitters. That may do the job for them.
They may also just be a person who eats a ton of sugar.
Just be new to it, yes.
Yeah, and so they're not calibrated for bitter.
Yeah.
But that whole concept of a super taster, listen, we're not all the same actually. We didn't all put our bodies together the exact same way. Yeah, okay, we've all got these bodies, but they're not your heart is not in exactly the same place as my heart. And all your different organs, there's variability in size, in location, in shape, in how many receptors did you make for this thing versus that thing, and how many capillaries do you have here or there or whatever. It's not like you cut us all open and we're exactly the same inside. We're not exactly the same outside. We're not exactly the same inside either. Even though you look at the anatomy books and it shows one picture, that is the composite standardized picture. It's not how bodies actually are. And if you want more information about that, then just ask any med student. because like this is, famously, especially like a med surg student, because this is famously a thing when they start doing real dissections and they're like, hold on, nothing is where it's supposed to be. It's not where it was on the book. And
how did your heart get over there on the right?
Yeah, right? But that's the thing, it's just like all of our bodies are different. And so we have this like, oh, it's a super taster. Yeah, that's only for the people who like have the job where they taste the wine and tell you what's in it. No. All different people have different numbers of receptors for things. And so, sure, it might just be that they live a high sugar lifestyle. And that can be calibrated for. But it may also be that they just have a ton of receptors.
Right. There's hardware and software differences, right? Like how many
Yes.
receptors you have versus how often you use them.
Yes.
Versus just like how familiar you are, how your body processes the priority of the signals.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, quercetin is like a thing that turns up in green leafy stuff. And then another flavonoid, naringin, this turns up in citrus peels, right? So if you ever, you eat citrus, maybe you're like really picky and you peel off all the white stuff. I urge you to eat the white stuff. That's got some of the best stuff there for you. Naringin and other associated flavonoids, like nice anti-inflammatory action there. Cool things. And then finally, well, not finally, but another example before I close here, alkaloids, right? A lot of alkaloids can be quite bitter. And alkaloids is a big group. It's a complicated group because it's not strictly about like molecular shape. Sometimes it's about, well, that chemical just has a real strong action on human nervous systems, so we're going to call it an alkaloid. Right?
It's like the adaptogens of
as long as it has a nitrogen
world.
molecule or a nitrogen atom in there somewhere, and it acts strongly on the nervous system, yeah, that's an alkaloid, sure. Right? So there's a lot of variety there, but some of them are very bitter and very famously so, like quinine is what's called an indole alkaloid. That's the group it's in. And quinine is a very powerfully bitter substance. Yeah. And then berberine, right, in the isoquinoline group. Those are, of course, also famously very bitter. And it's not just berberine there, right? It's hydrostine and a couple of other related compounds as well that are very similar to berberine and work synergistically with it. And that's why we always like to get not just one berberine herb, but give me as many as you can find and put them into a mixed tincture or a mixed spray or something like that, because that works better for infection management.
And anytime that we mention berberine containing plants and infection management, I just always want to note it is topical only.
Yeah.
This is not the herbal antibiotic that you can take as tincture and expect that to get all the way through your blood system and get to wherever you need an antibiotic the same way that a pill does, that a pharmaceutical antibiotic does. It is strongly antibiotic topically. Right. So on your skin and the lining of your digestive tract.
Especially the mouth, esophagus, stomach.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So we've been talking in some generalities, we've given a few particular examples, but we wanted to kind of go through some categories of bitters to emphasize again that it's not that there is bitters and they're all there together and it doesn't matter, just get any one of them and that'll be great, but that we can be more selective about them.
I mean, get any one of them and that'll be better than no bitters.
Fair enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
But we can do so much better than that.
Yeah. So we have